Welcome to the picnic set sewing pattern video tutorial. I'm going to walk you through how to make this beautiful set, dress and bloomers. Alright, let's get started with view C. I'm doing this fruity print and I've cut all my pattern pieces here. Make sure for view C that you do attach that little paper piece to your bloomers front and back before you cut out your fabric. I am going to start by serging the edges of my pockets and the side seams of my front and back dress. You could also use a zigzag stitch or bias tape. I'm not finishing the straight part of my pockets because they were cut on the selvage, so that's already finished up for me. Then I am going to match up the right side of my pocket to the right side of my dress front and back. I missed filming a good portion of that part because I did the thing where you press record but you actually press stop recording, and then you press stop recording but you actually press start recording. But anyway, I think you get the idea there. Now that I have those pockets sewn on, you're going to want to press that seam towards the pocket and then lay one dress with pockets on it, right side facing up, and then the next one will go on top, right side facing down, so that right sides are together. And then you start matching up that side seam from the underarm area there, down the pocket, and then all the way down to the hem, making sure things line up. And here's where I actually go and press that seam that I mentioned. Of course, I do recommend pinning or clipping these pieces together so that they stay right where you want them, but clearly I did not. When you get to the top of that pocket, press your foot up and pivot. I actually do a little back stitch first and then pivot to then go around that curved edge of the pocket, and then I'll do the same thing when I get to the bottom of the pocket. Turn and pivot and back stitch, just so you get that crisp like entry to the pocket, and it creates like a pretty dang invisible side seam pocket, if you ask me. Just a little side note, I hope you don't mind the little mess that I always sew in. I am not the neat, perfect little sewist, like everyone's nice and pretty, clean sewing spaces. So don't mind all those clips that I shove around throughout this whole video, please. They're just my little clippy friends. Then I'm going to press the seam open until the pocket. The pocket I'm going to press towards the front. This is where you just decide which one's the front, because the front and back are the same. Same with the sleeves, front and back, it's the same. That's why there's no markings. I didn't want it to be confusing. So this is basically me pressing it open and to the front. And now it's time to do the sleeves. So like I said, there's no front and back, so don't worry about that when you press your sleeve seam. But just put the sleeves right sides together, matching up the underarm. You're just going to sew with the normal 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then finish the seam. I just went over to the serger, finished it up, and then pressed that seam to the back. Again, there is no front or back. You just decide yourself. It is the same shape on both sides, so you get to pick. It is your choice. And unfortunately, my iron was not working, so every time I'm pressing something, I'm just like pushing on it so hard to get it to like take a shape. Yeah, iron broke, so got a new one later this day. Anyway, match up that side seam of your dress to that underarm seam of your sleeve and clip it there. Again, there's no notches because the sleeves and the dresses are the same, front, back, it's the same. I didn't want that to add any confusion. So then, yes, I clip it there at the seam and then match it up at the top of the sleeve and the dress, and then the other side at the top of the sleeve and the dress. And then sew with the 1 centimeter seam allowance and finish the seam. I again chose a serger to finish the seam, which is my finishing of choice. You could also use bias tape or a zigzag stitch. Something to note here is that little like notch at the top of some of these pieces. Do follow that with your seam allowance, and that will help when you go to fold over the neckline. It'll help that fabric ease in easier. Like there should be no easing in fabric if you follow your seam allowance around that little notch outline. the fabric will literally just fit as you fold it under rather than needing to be eased. Yeah, so here's me with that broken iron again, just really trying to press that seam and not getting anywhere. Next step is to take that collar, if you're doing view C, and put the collar right sides together, matching up that short straight side. Do make sure that your rounded edges are on the same side. So you don't want one rounded edge on the bottom, one rounded edge on the top when you're sewing the seam. Just make sure the rounded edges are in the same place. Yeah, so that center back seam with the 1 centimeter 3/8 inch seam allowance, and serge it or finish it in whichever way you'd like. Here's a little trick to help you with that curved edge, and I am especially using this trick and all my little tricks for this because of that broken iron. I'm sewing 2 lines of basting stitches, and that is so I can pull the little threads and it'll sort of curve the fabric under, and it also helps me gauge my seam allowance around the curve. If I sew, you know, a 1/4 inch away from the edge and then a 1/2 inch away from the edge, that is a 1/4 inch folded over and then a 1/4 inch folded over. I hope that's making sense. So then I'm going to take my little snippies and clip into the curve up until that seam line, and that is really going to help have that fabric want to fold over and lay more flat. It sounds odd, but it really works. And then I just use that stitching line, those snips, and that gathering or that basting stitch to sort of gather and fold and ease that fabric underneath that curve. It seems kind of finicky, but like it does fit, it does work, and the curved edge is really pretty in my opinion. And by some grace of sewing gods, my iron worked only around the curve for like 2 minutes. And it did not work all day until that curve. And that's why it stopped working at this point, and that's why I'm clipping it so much. Usually when I'm pressing something like this, I am steaming and pressing and it is not moving, but I clipped it down because it stopped working. But by some grace of sewing gods, it worked on that curve, and I could not have been more thankful. So then once you get it all pressed and ready to go, bring it to that sewing machine, stitch close to that folded edge to make sure you catch that folded edge so that the layers, you know, stay down, that raw edge stays captured in there. And it's basically just a hem at this point, since you have that fabric eased around the curve. So all the way around, and then I got a little fun here and put in some rickrack. And it's the simplest thing to add the cutest little touch. I just like to place that rickrack on my stitching line and then use a longer stitch length and matching thread to stitch the rickrack down on top of that, you know, previous stitching line that is for my hem. Anyway, just a cute optional little detail that you do not have to do, but I did. Your next step is going to be matching up that center back collar with the center back of your dress. Now, if you did not add pockets, you're probably just now deciding which is your your center back. Just make the decision. It is the same. Front and back are the same. You're going to place your collar wrong side to the right side of the dress and match up center back and follow along the edge, matching up the edge along the whole dress all the way to the center front, and there should be a small gap in the center front, about a 1/2 inch to an inch gap in the center front, and just baste it in place. I like to do 2 basting stitches that match my seam allowance. So I did one at a 1/4 inch and then one at 3/8 inch away from that 1/4 inch stitching line. If you've done both of those stitching lines, you can take your dress straight over to do some buttonholes. Start the top of your buttonhole at that 3/8 inch stitching line and go down the dress 1 centimeter long, 3/8 inch long. That is the same hem allowance, if you will, as the fold of the neckline. So that 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch long buttonhole will line up with the elastic slash tie casing that goes around the neckline. Then you can start folding over the neckline channel 1/4 inch and then 3/8 inch on top of that. Of course, my iron is still not working, so I am clipping and clipping and clipping, and I just really recommend getting a fresh iron if yours doesn't work. And here I am actually cleaning up those clips. Sometimes I do clear out the mess, but there's still more mess. Don't you worry. Then you are going to sew right next to that folded edge, as close as you can, just creating that channel for the tie and the elastic. If you're doing view B or C, you can just sew all the way around and insert your tie or tie slash elastic through the buttonhole. If you are doing view A, which has no buttonholes, you need to leave a little gap so that you can insert your elastic. And at this point, I got a fresh new iron, and I am just re-ironing the whole dress because, oh my gosh, that was a little pain not having a working iron. So your dress is certainly going to be looking a little bit crazy right now. Very, very large, very wide. You may be thinking you made the wrong size. You probably did not. This next part is going to help with the shaping and help it fit you. And it is sewing the ties. So just right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make those ties, and then I like to turn mine with a loop turner, but you can use a safety pin and just flip them right sides out. Sometimes it helps to reduce some of that seam allowance. With a seam allowance this small, sometimes it doesn't make much difference, but I do it anyway to make it a little bit easier. And once you have your ties, you're going to measure for your elastic. And here we go with this awful little demonstration on how I do that. So for view B and C, I measured just right before my shoulder around to right in front of my other shoulder. That is because we're going to attach the little ties to this elastic, and that tie is going to be just that front neckline area, and the elastic is going to go front of shoulder to front of other shoulder around your back. If you are doing view A, measure all the way around to the center front, and look at your back like I'm doing here to see how low it'll go. And then of course do a count. If you have a heavier fabric, this is elastic, this is 1/4 inch elastic, it will possibly pull it down a little, so maybe make it a little tighter. You can always adjust that, pin it in place, try it on, and see how it falls. So now I'm just matching up that elastic that I finally decided on the length of, just putting it with the ends of my tie. So one end of a tie to one side of the elastic, the other tie end goes to the other side of the elastic, and then I just add a little safety pin, pop it through the buttonhole, and just shimmy it right along that neckline casing. This part can be a little tedious, but just put on a good show, a good podcast, a good album, and enjoy it. Little story time. In like middle school, I used to love rethreading people's like hoodie ties. They'd like always come out in the dryer, and I loved just like threading that tie back through someone's hoodie. I don't know. I feel like I was destined to do this, I suppose. Anyway, back to the dress. When I get that tie through and the tie meets the elastic at that front sleeve seam, I like to sew it in place so the elastic stays around the back and the tie stays at the front. So a way you can check is that stretch test. So stretchy there, not stretchy there where the tie is, and I just sew it down at that front sleeve seam. Then you can tie a cute little bow, knot your tie ends, and start hemming. This felt so amazing to hem with a working iron. Oh my goodness. You just fold up a 1/4 inch and then the 3/4 inch and sew close to that folded edge. Since I'm doing view C, the sleeve is a little different. I do fold a 1/4 inch and then a full inch. And that creates the little ruffle. You're going to sew a little channel in there. So you'll do one line around close to that folded edge, leaving a little gap, and then 3/8 inch away from that stitching line, do another round. You don't need to leave a gap on that one. Go all the way around, and then measure your elastic on your upper arm and insert that through the little gap you left. If you're doing view A, your hem is the channel, so you don't have that extra stitching line, but you'll have a little gap still, and that creates the channel for the elastic. And here we are just threading that elastic through again. I just love this part so much. And then I'll pin it in place because you don't want to lose that end of your elastic. And then pull it through, stitch that elastic together, close up your gap, and repeat for the other sleeve. I added rickrack, and I'll be honest, I should have done that before I inserted the elastic. But you can kind of see here, that is the collar with green rickrack on it now because I swapped it out. It was a late night and I just felt like I needed to swap that to green. I did the yellow on the sleeves and then added pink to the hem, and I just love this final touch. But yeah, after you sew that elastic together and close up your hem of your sleeve, it's done. So here's my yellow rickrack, my green rickrack, and the pink at the bottom. And the dress is just beautiful. It's pretty done and ready to go. You just need your matching bloomers now. So let's get started on the bloomers. I have my front and back cut out, and you're just gonna start by matching them right sides together. So back right side together with the back, and you're gonna sew that center line, and the front right side together with the front, and sew that center seam line. Same seam allowance, and then finish it. I chose to finish with a serger. Again, you can use a zigzag stitch, bias tape, whatever you're feeling. Press that seam to the wearer's left side. So if you were to have these on your body, it would be your left. Then sew up the side seams and the crotch seam. This has that little angle to help with your hem allowance later, so do follow the seam allowance there. Finish the sides and finish the crotch. Press all seams to the back. So side seam and crotch seams all get pressed to the back of the shorts. And then we're going to hem the top. So fold in 1/4 inch and then 1 full inch, and same with the leg openings, 1/4 inch and 1 full inch. If you're doing view A or B, it's just 1/4 inch and then 3/8 inch. When you take it to the sewing machine, sew close to that folded edge and leave a little gap to be able to insert your elastic. And then if you're doing view C, sew another line of stitching 3/8 inch away from that first stitching line to create a casing that will then have your little ruffle effect at the hem. And then measure your elastic around your waist to get the right size elastic, and then same with your upper legs, just measure your elastic around your legs. And of course we are gonna thread some elastic through again. I love this. I'm just gonna pin my safety pin, pin my safety pin to the elastic, insert it through that little gap I left, follow it all the way through the waistband here. And when I get to the other side, I'm going to stitch my 2 elastic ends together. I just back stitch on it a few times, and then sew that gap closed and repeat for both of the leg holes. And then your little bloomers are done. Of course, the most important step is this. Please do this. Steam anywhere you have elastic, which is all over the place on this dress. Steam it. It will gather and ruche up so nicely. The elastic snaps back into place. The gathers just start to be emphasized and look more neat. I mean, maybe not neat, but more perfectly gathered, I guess you could say. And yeah, the bloomers are as simple as that. But seriously, do steam it everywhere. Here's my completed dress with all the fun rickrack colors. And take a look at the side seam. Where is it? Where even is it? There it is. You can hardly even see it. Yeah, that's a great side seam. Anyway, there's the bloomers, and of course I had to go back and add some rickrack, but I would really recommend adding your rickrack before you insert the elastic. But look at how cute the pink rickrack was on there. How could I not add rickrack to these bloomers? Anywho, congratulations, you are finished. If you do plan to share, please tag me and use the hashtag so we can all see how pretty it is.